Welcome, everyone, to the Aging and Spirituality podcast. We're so glad you're joining us back again this week. I'm Kathy Lee Taylor.
And I'm Chris Jensen.
And we have another guest this week. I know last week we were talking to Dr. Michelle May about mindful eating, and she referred us to her lovely friend, Megrette Fletcher. And we're so excited. She came on right away, and we're going to be talking about some really interesting things today. Megrette is a dietitian and an educator in the same subject. She's an international speaker, and she talks about mindful eating as well and having to do with diabetes. So she trains professionals in her program, and she works with a lot of organizations, child care centers, school systems, businesses, really trying to bring in that concept of mindfulness and mindful eating into corporate culture, which is really a powerful and amazing service. So she trains people that are dietitians, people that are diabetes educators, nutritionists, coaches, our healthcare professional, all these amazing people that can get this idea out that can be so beneficial to people, especially at this time of the year. We were talking about how end of the year, this is when people start thinking about their nutrition and their exercise and going to get their gym programs. So this is really timely, and really glad that she's here. So just a teeny bit of a story about Megrette. In 99, she became interested in mindfulness and from her practice of meditation. So, we have a little yogi here too that we want to talk about her story behind that. And she wanted to apply that idea of mindfulness to eating and teamed up with a person by the name of Fred Burgraff, who wrote a book called Discover Mindful Eating. And then in 2006, joined with others to create the Center for Mindful Eating. And you'll be able to find all of her resources, and I'll make sure all the links and stuff are in the show notes, so don't worry about that. So we're going to jump right in with Megrette, and we're going to ask you, first of all, about your personal story. We're going to get a little elaboration on how you came to this calling, this talking about mindful eating and the training that goes behind your methods, especially the meditation and the mindfulness part of it that we love so much.
Beautiful. Well, what a great jump off. So I started to meditate on a regular and consistent basis in 1999. So that was on a daily practice. And I really found a lot of benefits from meditation right off the bat. And I'm like a self-diagnosed ADHD kind of person, but I really recognize that there's something neuro different about me. And I just really needed to meditate. And it was kind of like it was oxygen, So I would meditate, and it was a thing that I could do that let me calm down.
Wow.
I know. And
That's
I
good.
laugh because the first, I would say 10 years that I meditated, I didn't actually meditate. I probably just sat still and was with my breath or breathing. And so this idea that meditation is very formal and there's a right way and a wrong way, I promise you, I did it wrong, and it still works. So that's how I really like, I get people are really worried. Oh no, what if and I'm like, there's a no mistake. So we're here, and we're just being with ourselves and just kind of giving ourselves that space and grace just to be with ourselves. And it's hard. So meditation is a practice. And I think that was kind of the second thing that really helped me was, I came from a land where if you didn't get it right the first time, there must be something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And again, I think meditation was like, you're not going to get it right the first time. There is no right, but second, it's a practice of returning. We're always getting distracted. We're always kind of falling off that present moment. And that's a normal thing. And really being around people that normalize, no, that's good. Yeah, you got distracted. You noticed that. That's beautiful. Let's just come back. Let's just come back. And so it was such a positive, it was such a great welcome now for me to be with this idea of the present moment is where change is possible. The present moment is where all my wisdom is possible. And yes, I'm going to get distracted, and that's 100% okay. We're just going to come back gently, just gently come on back. So
Wow.
that's my little story about meditation.
I have to stop. Sorry, Chris, I know you can jump in here, but I have to ask this question about when you said ADHD. I jumped in my chair a little bit because I have somebody who's in my family that swears that that does not allow her to be able to meditate. That the idea that, and I am by no means an expert on this subject, so please correct me and help our listeners understand this, because if we can get people who are neurodivergent to understand that their brain will settle down if it's given the chance, because they describe it like, when I learned to meditate, I would have said I had maybe 2 or 3 tracks going, whereas maybe an ADHD person might have 10 tracks going on, and it's like, this is not possible. I'm never going to be able to calm my mind. I'm never going to be able to get, you know past this, but you can. And I would really love to hear how you think that's different for you, as somebody that feels like they could possibly be ADHD.
Sure, sure. So I would just turn around and say it's okay for us not to do typical meditations. So meditations, which require a lot of spaciousness and non-destructibility, may not be the best meditations for us to start with. We may want to start with a more cognitive or active meditation. So I would really recommend the loving kindness meditation, where we're really active in that. Versus mindfulness of breath might be a little bit more difficult. Sometimes people just say, you know what, I'm just going to do a walking meditation. Amen. That's beautiful. Being out in nature. Amen. That's beautiful. So whatever you think you can do, let's just start there and let's rejoice in that. Now, the other thing that I really want people to understand is that when we think about meditation, people are like, oh, it's 30 minutes. Who said it's 30 minutes?
Mm.
Who said it's 30 minutes? Is it written down someplace? It has to be 30 minutes? We know the research shows benefit after 12 and a half minutes of meditation on a consistent basis. But again, we don't have to start there. I cannot run 12 and a half miles. I'm going to start with a much smaller distance and will work my way up. So this idea that I have to start at 12 minutes, or I have to start at 15, or I have to start at 20, or I have to do 30, or I have to sit for an hour, I feel like that is just we're just setting ourselves up to fail. So if we turn around, we say, I'm going to go at this with as much compassion and space and grace and say, what do I think I could do? So for a lot of people, mindful eating is a great trainer too, because if we're easily distracted and we say, wait a second, I'm just going to try to pay attention to this bite. Not only will I get to enjoy the food, but I'm actually practicing being mindful, and it might only last for 15 seconds. Maybe it's 20 seconds. Maybe it's 30. But that's 15, 20, or 30 seconds more of attention, and you're building that muscle.
Yeah, that's absolutely the best way to start. I mean, we often tell people in our beginning meditations that, if you can sit for 5 minutes or 3 minutes to start with, that's great. And then you just, as you get more peaceful, more as the mind starts to calm down, you can make it longer. So tell us a little bit about mindful eating and what the process is. And it's sort of an interesting concept, and how that helps people to be more centered and calm, as well as help them to eat better.
Sure, sure. So mindful eating is we're just trying to bring the idea of mindfulness to food and eating. So when we can pay attention to what we're eating, that would be mindful eating. There's a lot of misunderstandings around mindful eating, meaning that there's rules or regulations, or I don't know, that it's very orchestrated. And I said, no, it's a practice of returning to the present moment when we're eating. Eating is a sensory experience, so there's a lot of distraction that can happen when we eat. It can be filled with what I always call, it's a little bit like stepping in a time machine. Sometimes we eat something and we get transported back to a memory when we were 5. Sometimes we eat something and we get transported into the future. We worry, oh no, this is going to cause X or Y problem. But mindful eating is turning around and saying, no, I'm just going to be here with this experience, a sensory experience. And when I talk about a sensory experience, it is something that we measure in our body. So when we eat, we're turning around and saying, oh, what am I noticing on my tongue? What am I noticing as it slides down my throat, as it goes on my stomach? What can I become aware of? And sometimes we become really aware of it tastes delicious. Sometimes we become aware that it doesn't taste as good as we thought it would.
Hmm.
And sometimes we realize this is just a colossal disappointment.
Mhm. Yep.
And
Yep.
sometimes all three of those things happen while we're eating,
Mhm.
meaning that the first couple of bites might be yay, and the next couple might be meh, and then those last might just be like, why am I even bothering? And we might notice while we're eating these thoughts. So those tapes that we play in our head.
Right.
Mhm.
And those tapes may be very encouraging. Oh, this is such a nourishing food. They may not be encouraging. Oh my goodness, what are you doing? So
Mhm.
we could kind of notice
Mhm.
the voice tone of our inner dialogue. And when we notice the voice or the tone of our inner dialogue, mindful eating is based in a compassionate wisdom. So if the voice tone of we're eating is not compassionate, not wishing the best for us, maybe it sounds a little bit like the Snoopy voice. You know, the teacher, wah, 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 wah. That is telling us that's an awareness. Isn't that interesting? I'm not in this experience right now with this desire to care for myself.
Yeah.
I'm really listening to my inner dialogue, and it's really not very supportive.
Right. Judgmental, not kind.
Mhm.
And so what do you do at that point when you've got them, where they are experiencing those old stories? How can they help themselves?
Well, mindfulness, and I'm sure you've talked about this as well, but mindfulness starts with the awareness. So we have to become aware that it's happening.
Hmm.
Oh, that that familiar tape from when I was X years old is
Right.
playing. Oh, and then we might turn around and say, is that experience of having that tape pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant? Do I enjoy having that tape of my mother in my head?
Not likely.
Not likely, right? Not
Yeah.
likely.
Yeah.
So at this point, we can start really thinking about our own agency and say, well, what could I do?
Yeah.
I could talk to myself and say, hey, mom's not here.
Mhm.
I could maybe stop the behavior. I could turn around and say, you know what? Mom's right. I don't know, you know. But you have an opportunity to say, hey, this experience that I'm having while I'm eating, I'm having this inner thought, I'm having this familiar behavioral pattern happen, and I'm aware of that. And I'm aware that it's not really a pleasant experience for me. I am not enjoying this.
Right.
And I'm an adult. I have agency.
And you're saying this awareness then helps to prevent from just kind of a mindless overeating or eating the wrong foods.
We're triggered. You know, sometimes we are mindless because we disassociate. Maybe there's a trauma associated with that, and we disassociate from that and we just keep doing it
Right.
because we're trying to fill that. You know, maybe it is again, a lot of times we're really responding to a pain, a hurt that is just unresolved. And that's that compassion, which is again, when we have unresolved feelings that are triggering for us, just recognizing this is an unresolved feeling that's triggering, just naming it. Oh, I think this is a trauma response.
Mhm.
It's very powerful. Oh, I'm an adult. Mom's not here. These people aren't with me anymore.
Yeah.
I have agency.
Yeah.
And that is that mindfulness piece, which is wait a second. Now, sometimes we don't have agency. Sometimes it's just really triggering. And we're saying, okay, this is a really tough time. How can I compassionately be there for
Yeah.
myself?
How can I be kind to myself? Yeah, that's the. And is that part of what you talk about when you're talking about the mindful eating map? Is creating ways to respond to yourself as you realize you're going through this process, what's going on inside of yourself, you get the awareness, and then you counterbalance it somehow. So talk about what that eating map means.
Right. So the first one is the checking in. So step one is checking in. And that's just that, hey, what's going on with me right now? And
Mhm.
the way that I describe it, and it's the way that my teachers describe it to me, is if you can just imagine a body of water. When we check in, we're trying to determine, is that body of water full of waves or is it calm, flat? So we're just kind of noticing, hey, what's present for me,
Mhm.
you know? And so when we check in, we turn around and we say, hey, you know what? I might still be thinking about what I was doing a half hour ago. And here I am eating.
Right.
So I'm not here with my eating.
Yeah.
I'm in the past with what I was doing.
Mhm.
Right.
So when we check in, we're like, hey, I'm going to check in and set my intention to be here in the present moment.
Okay.
And you spoke with Michelle May. She talks about attention and intention. So our attention is on the present moment, and our intention is to be open and listening.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Could you give
And
us an example, perhaps, of someone maybe who has unmet needs, or how they use their program, and what they would do and what kind of results you've
sure,
found?
sure. So could you give me maybe a name of a person? Because I think it's always nice to have a name.
Janet.
Yeah, there you
Janet.
go.
Okay. So Janet is coming in and she's like, Megrette, I've got there's some stuff going on. And I'm like, so can't quite name it, Janet? And she's like, no, I can't quite name it. I can't quite name the stuff that's going on. And so we turn around and say, okay, so is that pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant experience? So what would Janet say?
Not pleasant.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, it's not pleasant. So I have some food and eating stuff, and it's like I can't name it. It's not very pleasant. And I would say, I hear you, Janet. So we want to add a lot of compassion and tenderness because right now you really want to understand what the heck is going on. It's
Yeah.
confusing, and the doubt is just really eroding your confidence.
Mhm.
You want to understand this.
Right.
And our tendency is to tell stories. But in mindful eating, we're just going to let that be present. You don't have to know. It can just be present. It's going to unfold for us if we're patient. So, Janet, you are patient and you're saying, I don't have to know that whole narrative that I have to know. That's just a story. I don't have to. It's going to unfold, but I'm just going to really be aware of my experience. So, right now, what could you do that might make this unpleasant eating experience just a little bit better?
Stop eating? The way
Maybe.
you're talking, and I'm trying to pretend I'm Janet. I'm like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not
Eat
gonna have
something
ice
else, right?
cream.
Could have something else. Could you be with it and just say, hey, wait a second. I don't understand what's going on. Maybe I'll adjust my seat. Maybe I'll just sit so I'm a little bit more comfortable. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I'll choose a food that I feel really safe with because I don't feel very safe right now.
Hmm.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
uncertainty.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So go ahead.
breathing help? Like if I took, because that's what a yogi would do. You'd like do some kind of breathing practice to try to get a little more centered and not be in that fear space.
Sure. So you're calming your waters when we breathe.
Mm-hmm.
So you're really turning around saying somatic activities I think are great when we're really triggered.
Yeah.
So, and again, for the listeners, those somatic activities are going back to our body. So when we talk about narrators, so we tell stories, that's just what the mind does. And if we had to trust which storyteller, the body or the body is a more reliable storyteller than the mind is.
Mhm.
The mind lies.
Makes things up for sure.
Yeah,
It
the ego
does.
does
It
tries to
all
mess it up.
fiction.
Yeah.
It does. The body, though, is nonfiction. The body's like, no, no, really, your hip does hurt.
Yeah,
Stretch that boy out. No,
Yeah.
no, really, you're not hungry.
Mhm.
Let's pause here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or you are hungry. You haven't eaten all day.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the body can be an amazing healer. Like if you're in a lot of pain, you can get up and just move or, you know, hug yourself or dance and just get into a flow where you can let that energy go and not have to hold on to those old stories all the time.
Not have to hold on to those old stories. And you said something I think is really powerful, which is as you start noticing, as you start kind of dipping into the present moment, you can turn around and say, oh, is this moment pleasant, neutral, or unpleasant? And you identified lots of ways that we could come into a more pleasant space by
Right.
moving our body.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, it really is a somatic experience. And so, you know, what I noticed one of the things on your site was your webinar that's called The Weight of Shame. And this, of course, got my attention because
Mhm.
I've actually coached a lot of women who shame is something that seems to be innate for us as little people. Us girls seem to grow up with it in such an
Mhm.
amount of instances like you know, like as a little I raised a boy, so I have a son, so I kind of know like when little boys, if they have a confrontation, right, like they'll punch each other and then the next minute they're playing together, it's already gone and it's over with, right? Whereas a little girl will feel ashamed about that you know, that confrontation will make them feel like there's something about themselves that's not worthy. There's something wrong about themselves. So we carry this innate shame for whatever reason from a very young age. So, you know, I really want you to talk about that in terms of um, why does it happen so often to women? And what can they do about it? How can they recognize when that's going on and be able to let that go? Because that could be something that you absolutely overeat from.
Sure, sure. So there's some terminologies just to clarify. So shame, and I'm using Brene Brown's definition of shame.
Mm,
It's a universal, exquisitely painful experience that tells us that we are unworthy.
yeah.
That's very different than guilt. So guilt is I did something wrong.
Mhm.
Shame is I am wrong.
Right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's how women feel.
Right. So guilt is, oh, I broke the vase. I feel guilty. I broke mom's favorite vase, or I
Mhm.
broke my favorite vase. I feel
Mhm.
guilty.
Right.
I broke something, and that's why I have that feeling. Shame is I am unworthy. I am an unworthy person because I broke that vase. It's not what I did, it's who I am.
Yeah, it's who I am. That's how we
Yeah,
see.
that is how it starts. And there's so much of that in our culture that women have to
Right.
deal with, not just with parents growing up and in schools, excuse me, and in the corporate world, it's there, you know.
Right. And so when we talk about shame, we're talking about the experience of stigma.
Mm.
So, stigma is when society creates conditions by which we are judged or othered.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, stigma is the term, and shame is the experience.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so, stigma is the judgment, and shame is the experience.
Right.
Okay. And it's really important to understand that stigma is not what the person experiences, it's the conditions by which they experience shame.
Mhm.
Got
Okay.
it.
So you guys talked about society. Society has stigma, and when stigma is present, we experience shame.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay. So why you have two situations. So you have two people, we have Brenda and Bob, and we have experience X happens.
Mhm.
Brenda feels shame and Bob feels guilt.
Mhm.
Okay.
So there's lots of conditionality that happens that might make it more painful for Brenda than Bob. And that's one of the things that's about resilience.
Mm.
Mhm.
So when we think about trauma-informed care, lots of things, anything can be traumatic for someone if they don't have that supportive relationship that allows them to become resilient. Say, wait a second, that isn't true. I'm not a bad person. People break vases, Wait a second, that
Mm.
isn't true. That's society. Society's expectations are unrealistic. They challenge that, which you said the boys challenged and they moved on. So they have, maybe society allows men to be more resilient.
Mm.
But resiliency is really about having those trusted relationships that allow us to challenge situations
Mhm.
that are difficult.
Yeah.
Now, those trusted relationships are typically formed in childhood, where it would be we have uh, an effective attachment to a parent or family member or a friend.
Mhm.
But that relationship is really key
Mhm.
to allowing us to become resilient.
Mhm.
And women have different hormones than men. And so that's part of what makes them resilient and what makes them more susceptible to shame. So we
Mm.
have
Mm.
conditionalities, we have some biology, we have relationships. So there's a lot of factors. It's not a simple thing, it's a very complex thing. But ultimately, in all of those, the ability to pause and to self regulate. I am experiencing something that's very shameful for me.
Mm.
I'm experiencing that and it's
Okay.
painful. And I acknowledge that it's painful. And somebody says, "Hey, Megrette, what's going on?" I'm like, you know what? I just had an interaction. It was really unpleasant. And I'm in a shame spiral.
Mm.
That is a huge skill.
That is a skill.
Yeah.
That is a huge skill. And most people over the age of 60 didn't get that
Like that.
class.
Mm.
And how, what did you mean by self-regulate?
Self-regulate. So when you do the yoga, when you say, "Oh, we can do those somatic activities," is that a self-regulating?
Mm.
Yeah, okay. So you choose, you allow yourself to have the awareness, you feel the whatever it is, the shame, the
Uh,
pain, the whatever,
Ouch.
and
Yeah.
and,
Mm.
and, and you choose to do something to move away from that, be open, receptive to something different.
And a lot of times
In
it's
yoga,
just,
we kind of call that situation like where you look at a situation
yeah,
and there's all these impetus to do something that you don't really want to do or know is good. And you just say in that situation, who's the boss here?
who's the boss?
And that
Who's the
kind of
boss?
puts, that
I'm
allows
lost.
you to just make that choice.
Mm,
Mm.
mm. And again, it's that grounded, centered decision. And it
Mhm.
happened because you paused and you said, "Hey, wait a second. This is really not going well."
Yep.
No judgment there.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's
Yep.
just unpleasant situation. Guess
Yep.
what? You're going to have unpleasant situations in your life.
Yeah,
They're really common.
Yep.
yeah,
They are. They don't have to be the end of us.
Mhm.
But again, when we turn around, we go, "This is an unpleasant situation. Maybe I need to have some strong boundaries here.
right.
Maybe I need to walk away.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to talk to my friend. Maybe I need to say, hey, I'm so glad it was not painful for Bob. It really was not working for me." And you're allowed to be different than Bob.
Mhm.
Yeah,
You can be happy for Marcia and, you know,
Mm.
we all get to be different. What we get to feel our feelings
we
and
do.
we don't have to judge them.
Right. That's the whole point, not judging them, not making that judgment. It just is.
Creating that
Yeah.
neutral space. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I work with clients, I call it space and grace.
Mhm.
Oh,
It's
good
very
point.
nice. Yeah.
It is pretty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us a
And a
little
lot of,
bit about your work with diabetes. You have a book, Eating for Diabetes. How does your
sure.
program work to help people?
Sure. So that I did co-author with Michelle May.
Mhm.
And, she developed a mindful eating cycle, which is super helpful. And so we applied it to diabetes care. And it's a way for people to kind of turn around and say, wait a second, diabetes stigma is something that's very prevalent. It's an epidemic right now. And that stigma is that shaming experience where, oh, I shouldn't have had diabetes. I coulda, shoulda, woulda. But diabetes is a present condition. It does affect about 25% of the population. As we get older, we're more likely to get diabetes. And so how can we take a more holistic mindfulness approach to diabetes care? And so in the mindful eating cycle, we kind of walk through people and say, wait a second, is our knowledge solid or is it a little squishy? And most of my clients will say, I kind of know about diabetes, but not really. So the book really goes through some very, it just is good standards of care around diabetes. Well, the second thing that happens is, okay, I learned something, but I don't know how to eat because I have a lot of feelings about eating, a lot of cravings about eating. And I'm like, amen. I think we all do.
Yeah.
And so when people say I have a lot of feelings and cravings around food, again, they can get triggered by that and go into a shame spiral. But we all have a lot of feelings around food. And if we feel like our food and eating choices caused a chronic condition, well, that can really transport us. Remember, we step in that time machine and we might go into the past or we might go into the future. But where we aren't is the present moment. And that's where change can happen. The present moment is the only place that change can happen because I can't change the past and the future hasn't come. So again, going back to that mindfulness, oh, I'm here, I'm in the present moment. And I really love, what you had said, Chris, earlier, which is, I got my back. Who's in charge here? And that's just that grounding. It's just taking that deep breath. And for a lot of people, going back to that somatic experience of just taking a deep breath, centering myself and saying, where is my attention? Am I in the past, in the future? What is my intention?
Yep.
And that process really helps us. And so the mindful eating cycle has the 6 questions that people can go through. And a lot of times just asking, am I hungry? Which is the first question.
Not just eating because, yeah.
Exactly. Is a habit. And there's this force, I call it the force of familiar. The force of familiar is really hard to get our head around. So I'll use you, Chris, because you haven't talked very much. So I'm going to use you as an example, okay?
Okay.
All right. So when something's familiar, do any bells and warning lights go off? Or do you go, I'm not worried, it's familiar?
Depends on what kind of familiar it is. If it's a pleasant familiar experience, yeah. If it's unpleasant, then I want to look at it and see what I can do about it.
So you've identified, I am going to notice at the either extremes, but life is not in the extremes. It's all in the middle. It's all in that squishy middle between those two. So there's a lot of stuff where we are not really very aware of. And so we do what we've always done. We get these habits and we turn away and say, well, there's no warning lights going off because it's familiar. It's what I do. It's what I eat. It's what I do after dinner. I always eat this way. These foods are familiar to me. And so familiar can take away our warning system. Warning, you're doing the same behavior over and over and over again. And familiar can also be very soothing because we're like, it's new. That's unfamiliar. Oh no, my warning lights are up.
Right.
So we can start seeing how familiar and unfamiliar can work against us in the change process, or it can lure us back to just repeating the same change over and over again. So we're actually not changing. We feel like we're changing, but we're actually not changing. And this is where mindfulness really helps us pause and say, wait a second, am I just doing the same stuff I've been doing before? Or am I actually aware enough to say, I know this feels familiar, but is this really helping me? And that's the interrupt.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this
Good.
really helping?
Yeah. Is it changing me and transforming me? Because think about it, if somebody's really stuck and doesn't understand how their body feels when they're overeating, they don't have the reference point to move away from it, Like you
It's
said,
familiar.
it is so dang familiar. And I can really relate to that. Like once you get that awareness of, okay, I just ate that ice cream and I thought it felt good, but dang, I don't feel good right now. That
Now that I've eaten that.
you start having different relationships to your food, different responses, whereas before you would never notice that before. And you have to get past that anxiety of paying attention, focusing on your body, which is where I think meditation and likely mindfulness helps. You're able to anchor into that somatic experience and just get a level of calmness where you can actually learn to surrender it, let it go, you know?
You said a lot there. So Kathy, you just said a lot.
Okay.
So can we unpack it a little bit?
You can unpack it.
Amen. Amen. So the very first thing that you said was when we have that experience and we're reactive. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're in a reactive state. Mindfulness is turning around and saying, when I'm reactive, my prefrontal cerebral cortex, which is represented by my fingers,
Yeah.
It's like blown off the top of my brain. So I've
It's
disengaged. It's right. I blew the top right off. So I've disengaged my thinking part of the brain. And now I'm just in that emotional reactive state, that limbic state, where I'm just reacting. So when I pause and say, I'm allowed to react, it's a perfectly normal response.
Yep. Yep.
It's not helping me though.
Right.
And that's the distinction.
That's the distinction. Stop judging yourself and get past that.
Right. So that ability to turn around and say, I'm allowed to react. It's a perfectly normal thing to do. I really want to change and I didn't, and I'm mad and I'm frustrated. It's a very normal reaction. Okay. But I'm going to do what you said, Kathy. I'm going to take a couple of breaths and I'm going to say, I'm allowed to have reactions.
Yep.
And who's in charge? Me. I want to do what's best for me. What's best for me?
I love this.
Yeah. What's best for me?
Who's the boss, right?
Who's the boss? Who's the boss?
Take
So it's just that resetting. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how our listeners, if they're interested in your program and where they could learn more about you and how they could.
Sure. Yeah. So the book is available at amihungry.com. And there's also a self-paced program that people can participate in, and that's through amihungry.com. And then I see patients individually through a company called Nourish, and you can get there through usenourish.com. And so I work with people one-on-one individually if they're interested. And then I do a lot of volunteer work for the Center for Mindful Eating. And you can visit the Center for Mindful Eating by just Googling it. And you can listen to recordings of myself. And I also do trainings for professionals if professionals are listening. But really, just really starting to get a community and a practice together where we can start turning around and saying, I think this mindful eating business could be good. There is a lot to discover and explore and play with before we jump into the challenge. I'm going to start eating mindfully. So slow down, start small, and say, oh, I just discovered this idea of mindful eating. I'm going to explore it more. Maybe I'll read a book. Maybe I'll take a class. Maybe I'll meet with a coach. There's lots of mindful eating people through the Center for Mindful Eating. Am I Hungry has a lot of professionals that they've trained as well. So there's just some resources out there to really help you. The key thing is that mindful eating is a non-diet approach. So it's a weight-inclusive approach. So it's not a way that we would go and eat mindfully to lose weight. So that's kind of a misnomer. And I'd like to explain why we say that. So weight loss is a future outcome, and mindful eating is a present moment experience. Many people, when they eat more mindfully, they really find that they're able to nourish their bodies in ways that they haven't been before. Their weight may or may not change, but the intention of mindful eating is to be in the present moment. It is not to, tone up or lose body fat or that kind of stuff. mindful eating is oxygen. It's a way of changing how we think, calming those waters, calming those waters so our mind becomes calm. It's a way for us to co-regulate ourselves when we're activated. It's a way for us to see the truth. The truth is that the present moment is precious. We think the future is really where it's at, or we think the past is really where we should be. But the present moment is a present. That's the beauty of it.
It's our gift.
That's
It
our
is.
gift. And
It
we
is.
miss it. We
Yeah.
miss it all the time.
Yeah.
So when we take on this practice of being in the present moment, we're really taking on the practice of being human.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because the present moment is not always rainbows and butterflies. It
Right.
can be exquisitely painful. But you
Mhm.
know what? That's life. There's some exquisite pain out there.
That's very
Can't
profound.
avoid pain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a profound thing to say. I don't want that to go by without acknowledging that, because it is the truth. And
Yeah.
this work will allow you to understand how to comfortably be in that moment and live a much more fulfilled life.
Right.
Right.
You don't have to get stuck in that, because when we don't acknowledge the pain, we get stuck in it.
We do. We do. Yeah, for sure. For
It
sure.
kind of feels like your work is would be very beneficial on a community-based um format. Do you have people get together and chat about their stuff after, like, all of your people that you coach and stuff? Is there an online community that people can get on there and ask their questions, or?
Sure. So I think the Center for Mindful Eating would be good. I know that Am I Hungry offers some coaching programs as
Okay.
well. So
Okay.
that could be something.
Mm.
There are a number of kind of like health equity programs like My Beloved Community and BCA Global, which is Beloved Community Global. And so we start looking at how mindfulness really has a very strong, um, civic. We're activated because
Yeah.
we recognize that, hey, you know what, as I am able to calm myself, as I'm able to self-soothe and self-regulate, I have a greater capacity. And all of a sudden I start seeing, oh, wait a
Yes.
second, I am starting to see how things are connected, just like you did, Kathy. You
Yes.
said, wait a second, and
Yeah.
you started making all kinds of connections, and they're
Mhm.
there. Mindfulness is a compassionate act.
Yeah.
So it is based in loving kindness. It's
Yes.
very important for people to understand that if it doesn't feel compassionate, get support, get help, because it is based in you caring
Right.
for yourself
Right.
and really wanting what's best for you. And so there's a lot of compassion there.
But and not just self-compassion. I mean, what you said, if you take that the next step, if you are able to deal with whatever's going on in your life, be able to get this presence, understand how to self-regulate, give up all of these old stories and move forward, you're now somebody who is available to be compassionate and of service to others. And this is something we always talk about on our cast, is that, as you get older, all of this stuff just sounds like being on a wheel, a hamster wheel. We want to get off long enough to be a benefit to ourselves and to
Right.
other people in the world. This is what
Sure,
humanity
sure.
is meant to be doing for each other.
Yeah,
So
for
I,
sure.
I did want to ask you too. You say on your site you have 3 bite retreats. Do you have something coming up that people could get involved in?
I don't. So that's
Okay.
offered through Arialoka Buddhist Retreat Center in Newmarket.
Okay.
And I am not offering that. I am caring for my 92-year-old mom.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, so she lives with me and I'm the sole caregiver. And
Yeah.
so I've just really scaled back my offerings right now because I don't have enough capacity.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's very wise.
We all
Very
have
wise.
those situations, and listeners, go to her website. I'm going to put it in the show notes for you, and you can get the kind of help you want, probably even if just reading the book. And from am I hungry.com, which is Dr. May's
Right.
program that we
Right.
talked about last week. So, okay, is there anything else that you want to say before we close out this wonderful and helpful conversation that you want to offer to people, or?
I think we did a great job.
Okay, good,
Well, thank you
good.
very much. This was very
Yeah.
helpful. I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate it.
It's really enlightening to me. I can remember weird conversations, that things that happened to me in my childhood that had to do with food. And it's very interesting to be able to just apply some of the things that you were talking about. It had effects on me that affected relationships with people, like my mother, for, one is a big example. She was horrible about food, and I caught all kinds of wrong ideas from her. But what you were saying today is very helpful in that way. So I'm hoping our listeners, whatever you got going on with food, exactly, whatever you got going on with food, listen to this
Listen to this.
podcast
Yeah.
over and over again, read the books, and we'll hope they're helpful
Now
for
read
you.
the book and go to her website because help is available.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you so much.
thank you, listeners. See you next week.